My name is Veronica Justice Hale, and for most of my life, my family called me the quiet one, the cautious one, the one who never quite figured it out. My sister Madeline was their shining star CEO by 35, media darling, the one they bragged about at every dinner party. And me? I was the name they skipped in Christmas cards, the seat they didn't save at the table. They said I was wasting my potential, said I lacked ambition, that I'd never survive in the real world. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that I had spent years building something they couldn't see. A reputation in the shadows. A voice in a system that rarely listened. A seat in a courtroom where power had no last name. But I never imagined the day would come when those two worlds, my family's judgment and my professional silence, would collide in a single moment of reckoning. It happened in courtroom 3C at the federal courthouse in D.C., the day my sister Madeline stood trial for wire fraud and securities deception. I was there, seated in the back row, unrecognized, anonymous in a charcoal suit. My parents didn't even glance my way. And then, mid-session, the presiding judge halted the proceedings. "The scope of this case," he said, "requires a federal bench clearance we currently lack." He turned, slowly, eyes scanning the back. Then he said the words that cracked the air open like thunder. "Veronica Justice Hale, would you take the bench?" My mother gasped. My father stood. Madeline went pale. I rose. My name echoed off the marble. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the one holding the gavel. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house where silence meant order and praise was reserved for perfection. My sister Madeline fit that mold from the moment she could walk. Blonde curls, flawless grades, a talent for charm. She was the daughter who made our parents' faces light up at parent-teacher conferences. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. Too curious. Too soft-spoken. Too much of a question mark in a family that wanted exclamation points. By age 10, Madeline had already been cast as Juliet in the local theater's spring play. I got a bronze medal in a school writing competition and taped it to the fridge. It was gone by morning. When I asked where it went, Mom just said, "It didn't match the kitchen." That's the kind of home I grew up in, where achievements that couldn't be framed in a holiday letter were quietly erased. In high school, I gravitated toward the school library like it was the only place oxygen lived. I read legal case books for fun, annotated every news article about civil rights with a red pen, and memorized closing arguments like most kids memorized song lyrics. But at the dinner table, no one asked about my interests. They asked about Madeline's internships, her boyfriend in pre-med, the internship she landed at a biotech firm 2 towns over. Once, I mustered the courage to say I was thinking about law school. My father, Douglas Hale, former corporate executive turned small-town investment advisor, didn't even look up from his roasted chicken. "Law?" he muttered. "Too much debt, too little return. You should think about something safer. Maybe dental hygiene." My mother nodded while reaching for the salt. "Or speech therapy. Something useful." I remember sitting there, the steam from my plate rising like smoke from a fire I wasn't allowed to name. Jules, my best friend since 6th grade, once said, "You were born into the wrong script, V. But maybe that just means you're supposed to write your own." That became a quiet mantra I carried into college. I left home at 18 with a partial scholarship to UNC Chapel Hill and 3 boxes of books. No family send-off. "No, we're proud of you." Just a ride, share driver, a prepaid phone plan, and the echo of "Don't disappoint us" ringing in my ears. College was a breath I'd been holding for years. I majored in political science, minored in philosophy, and worked nights at the campus legal clinic. I rarely called home, partly because I was too busy, partly because silence hurt less than the sound of indifference. It was Professor Robert Henley, who changed everything. He taught advanced constitutional law, and from the first lecture, I felt like someone had finally turned on the lights. After reading my second-term paper, he stopped me after class. "You ever consider clerking?" he asked. I shrugged. "Not seriously. Me family doesn't think I'm cut out for that world." He leaned against the desk and smiled. "Then it's a good thing it's not their world to begin with." Under his guidance, I interned with a state judge my junior year. Then came law school at Georgetown, a federal clerkship in Baltimore, and eventually a rare opening on a special review panel that handled sensitive federal cases. Every step forward, I kept quiet. No social media posts, no emails home. I wasn't hiding, I just didn't need their permission anymore. By 36, I was nominated to a federal magistrate position in D.C., assigned to assist on high-level jurisdictional cases that required discretion. The appointment was confidential until confirmed. When it became public, my parents didn't call. Neither did Madeline. I suppose they were too busy polishing her image. And yet, despite everything, part of me still craved their notice. I wouldn't admit it out loud, not even to Jules, but every bar exam passed, every hearing won, every sleepless night writing decisions with footnotes so clean they could slice some part of me hoped they'd hear about it, that they'd finally say she made something of herself. But it never came. Until that courtroom. But that part of the story doesn't start here. It starts with Madeline's Fallen, the first time I saw my family in nearly 7 years. Not at a wedding, or holiday, or funeral, but in the federal courthouse, sitting in the front row behind her, whispering with a lawyer about image damage and restitution strategy. They didn't see me. Not yet. But they would. I didn't plan to attend the trial. Not at first. When news broke that Madeline Hale, celebrated biotech founder, was under federal investigation for securities fraud, my instinct was to stay away. Conflict of interest. Personal entanglement. Professional optics. I told myself all the right reasons. But then I read the preliminary charges: wire fraud, false statements to investors, misuse of federal grants, and I recognized the pattern. Madeline hadn't just made a mistake. She had built a company on a scaffolding of deception. And it wasn't the first time she'd lied. 2 years earlier, she'd asked me to glance over a licensing agreement between her company and a federal research agency. I reviewed the document on a weekend flight, flagged 3 major compliance red flags, and emailed her detailed edits. She never responded. Weeks later, I saw her quoted in a business journal, praising herself for catching the legal loopholes sword for word from my summary. That was the last time I answered her emails. Now, here she was, on trial in courtroom 3C, the very place I'd spent the last 4 years helping rebuild public trust in a system too often bent by wealth and polish. I didn't go to support her. I went to witness the truth. I wore no robe, no badge, just a gray blazer, dark slacks, and a lanyard identifying me only as a judicial staff observer. From the back row, I saw my parents before they saw me. My father in a navy suit too tight at the collar, my mother in pearls and practiced poise. They were seated behind Madeline, nodding as her defense attorney whispered strategy. They looked comfortable, like they still believed she'd walk out of this untouched. The hearing began on schedule. The prosecution presented emails, wire logs, and altered reports. They displayed timelines and voice recordings, one where Madeline promised a return on investment that violated federal cap limits. Her voice, so confident, so calm. It was like hearing a song I used to love played in a key I no longer recognized. Still, she sat tall. Perfect posture. A small smile. I'd seen that smile before at school recitals, science fairs, even funerals. It was her armor. Charm as a shield. Manipulation as muscle memory. The courtroom was packed with reporters, investors, and former employees. Her defense was leaning heavily on jurisdictional gray areas, arguing that parts of the case didn't fall under federal purview. It was risky but clever. If the presiding judge couldn't establish jurisdiction, the entire trial could derail. That's when I noticed something strange. Judge Connolly, a seasoned district judge, kept glancing at the clerk's bench, his brow furrowed, jaw tense. Then, 30 minutes into the session, he lifted his hand. "Court will recess for 10 minutes, he said. His voice was steady, but I saw it, the uncertainty in his eyes. I stepped out into the hallway for water, and that's when it happened. I heard him. Not in the courtroom, but in a side hall, behind the frosted glass door. I don't have the clearance, he was saying into the phone. This crosses federal contract territory. We need a judiciary officer with bench clearance for crossover funding cases. Silence. Then, is Hale on site? My stomach flipped. A moment later, my own phone buzzed. An internal message. Be prepared. You're being activated for Bench 3C. I stood still, staring at that message. I knew this was possible. Weeks earlier, the chief magistrate had warned me the case could escalate. Since I had a personal conflict, I had recused myself as led, but they'd listed me as emergency standby should jurisdiction become a problem, and no alternative could be arranged in time. But I never imagined they'd actually call me in. Not today. Not this case. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. This court, he began slowly, has encountered a jurisdictional issue that requires immediate remedy. The nature of federal funding involved in this case and the timeline of alleged violation succeeds the parameters of this court. He turned and looked directly at me. Pursuant to Order 11, CF 27, I hereby defer to the jurisdictional authority of Magistrate Judge Veronica Justice Hale, who is present and cleared. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My parents turned as if yanked by invisible string. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's expression hardened into confusion. Madeline's jaw twitched. I rose. Calmly. Deliberately. I walked past rows of reporters and spectators, each step sharp against the marble floor. All rise, the bailiff called. For the Honorable Veronica J. Hale. The gavel felt familiar in my hand, smooth, balanced, worn. My voice, when I spoke, came steady. This court now proceeds under federal jurisdiction. All prior objections are noted. Let us continue. I didn't look at my family. Not yet. Not as I outlined federal statute, clarified the applicable case law, and granted the prosecution's motion to reframe their case under the appropriate statutes. The defense attorney fumbled, clearly unprepared for the escalation. I remained professional, restrained, but every decision I made sent a quiet, resounding message. I am not the girl you dismissed. I am not the failure you pitied. I am the one they now call Your Honor. By the second day, the courtroom no longer felt like a place where Madeline Hale might walk free. It felt like what it was always meant to be, a place where truth demanded air. And I was the one ensuring it could breathe. I maintained distance, not just professionally, but emotionally. No eye contact with my family, no lingering glances, just the law. Every motion ruled upon, every objection handled with clarity. The prosecution built its case brick by brick, false valuations, altered grant reports, forged performance data. Madeline's legal team scrambled to slow the bleeding, but nothing they offered could match the weight of what was coming. On the third morning, the prosecution requested to introduce a new piece of audio evidence previously sealed under investigative review. I reviewed the motion, checked the clearance, and nodded. You may proceed. The court quieted as the speakers clicked on. It was a voice recording taken from a private investor meeting 6 months before the indictment. Madeline was speaking, confident, even amused. I mean, come on, she said, laughter in her voice. Half those reports are dressed up fairy tales. We inflate, they invest, everyone gets paid. Nobody asks questions when the money flows. That's just how you play the game. Silence. Then a few gasps. I watched the jury-only man dropped his pen. A woman on the end shifted in her seat. The recording ended with her voice, smug and smiling. It's not lying. It's optimism, packaged properly. Madeline sat perfectly still. My mother's hand clutched the edge of the bench like it was the only thing holding her upright. My father looked straight ahead, face pale, the skin around his jaw twitching. I took a breath and turned to the jury box. You may disregard tone, but not content, I said firmly. The recording meets evidentiary standards and stands. Let us proceed. We recessed early that day. The defense requested time to regroup. In the hallway, I heard her heels before I saw her. Veronica! Madeline hissed, eyes blazing. She stood between me and the judge's chambers. How could you do this to me? You're my sister! I didn't flinch. You're on trial for defrauding investors. I'm doing my job. She stepped closer. No, you're making a point. This is revenge. No, I said evenly. This is accountability. You wanted applause. You got exposure. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, our mother arrived, perfume thick, eyes red. Veronica, this is your family. You're humiliating her. In front of everyone. In front of the news. What are you thinking? I turned toward her. I'm thinking that for 38 years, I waited for one of you to see me as more than a mistake. And now, I don't need that anymore. Please, she whispered. She's your blood. No, I said quietly. She's a grown woman who committed federal crimes, and you helped her believe she'd never face consequences. From behind them, my father approached slower than usual, as if the weight of what he'd ignored was catching up. You never said anything? He muttered. We didn't know you'd become this. You never asked, I replied. And then I walked past them, no anger, no drama, just the simple, clean sound of footsteps that no longer needed to tiptoe around approval. Back in chambers, I sat down, heart beating steady now, not because I felt nothing, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't torn between truth and love. The love had been conditional. The truth wasn't. The next day, closing arguments began. The defense gave it one last shot, painting Madeline as a misunderstood innovator, a dreamer who stretched the truth under pressure. The prosecution reminded the jury of every falsified statement, every dollar misused, every voicemail where she spun fiction into funding. And then, deliberation. It didn't take long. 3 hours. When the jury filed back in, the room fell into the kind of silence that tastes metallic. Has the jury reached a verdict? I asked. The foreperson stood. We have, Your Honor. Please read it. In the case of United States v. Madeline Hale, on the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. A sharp inhale. On the count of securities fraud, guilty. On the count of federal grant misrepresentation, guilty. The words dropped like stones. Madeline closed her eyes. My mother gasped, barely able to breathe. My father put a hand on her back, but didn't speak. I didn't look at any of them. I kept my posture, my tone. Sentencing will be scheduled within 30 days. Court is adjourned. Gavel. As people rose, reporters rushed from the room. I stood, turned, and walked back to chambers. Only once I was alone did I sit again and exhale. A few minutes later, Jules knocked on the door and slipped inside. You did it, she said. No, I replied quietly. The law did. She smirked. Sure, but the law didn't walk in there like a ghost and walk out as thunder. That was you. I smiled for the first time in days. And when she left, I sat alone with the silence I used to fear. But this time, it felt earned. The weeks after the verdict were quiet in a way I'd never experienced. Not hollow, not lonely, just still. Madeline's sentencing made the news. Investors sued. Her company was gutted. Her image erased from every glossy magazine cover our mother once framed. I didn't follow the updates. I didn't need to. My part was done. In chambers, I returned to work rulings, mentorships, long opinions that demanded clarity and patience. I found peace in the structure. There was no applause, no spotlight, just the law. Just the sound of my own steady voice, no longer shaking. One morning, as I was leaving court, I passed a reporter outside who barely looked up. It hit me then. I wasn't a headline anymore. I was just Veronica Hale. And for the first time, that felt like freedom, not erasure. A few days later, Jules and I sat on a park bench overlooking the Potomac. She handed me a folded clipping from a legal journal. They called you the quiet spine of integrity, she said. I smiled. That's better than failure. My parents never called. My mother sent a belated Christmas card in May, blank inside except for a pre-printed wishing you peace. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. In late spring, I gave a guest lecture at a law school. It was small, just 20 students, fluorescent lights, scratched desks. But when I stood at the front and introduced myself as Judge Hale, I felt something shift inside me, something click into place. Afterward, a student waited behind. She was young, uncertain, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you become someone they had to respect when no one ever believed in you?" I paused, then looked her in the eye. "You stop waiting," I said. "You build a life so steady, so undeniable that even the ones who looked away have to feel your name in the room." She nodded, biting her lip, then walked away, and I stood there a while longer, letting that moment root itself inside me. That evening, as I left the building, the sky had turned a soft amber, the kind of color that never asks to be seen, but still takes your breath. I didn't need applause, or vindication, or even their regret. I just needed this, to walk into the world with my own name, and know that it was enough.